Righty, good. Morning, everybody. Some great questions from the listeners at X on X. So we start with, not a philosophical question, but you talk a lot about family dynamics. Have you ever talked about dealing with senior parents? I'm extremely anti-nursing home, but dealing with folks on their own that refuse any help or to move in near me and the grandkids. They refuse to turn over any control over their health or finances. I prefer not to come in and force my way into their affairs, but they're now in their 80s, and I think that to leave them be is going to start to border on negligence at some point, i.e. driving, med management, etc. Any advice would be appreciated. So the great enemy of virtue is not evil, but vanity. Vanity is a subset. Evil is a subset of vanity. There's something that's kind of missing from men, in particular, in the modern world, which is cold-hearted justice. Cold-hearted justice. We've sort of been replaced with this bend over backwards, turn the other cheek, love everyone, and it's terrible. Absolutely. We only have the modern world because of cold-hearted justice, at least in the West, and I'm talking, of course, about the 1 or 2% of evil people who were executed like every year for hundreds of years. So we have this kind of cold justice, and one of the problems, we used to have this kind of cold justice, and one of the problems we have in the world at the moment is that because we mostly got rid of our worst evildoers, what's happened is we now can afford to, quote, love everyone and be nice to everyone, be kind to everyone. It's not a reality. It's like the kid who's inherited $10 million wondering, gee, well, why does anyone take any jobs they don't like? Why does anybody... but why don't you have a yacht? You know, this kind of thing, right? I mean, I had a friend when I was younger. This woman who, after Christmas, said, oh, here's all the things I got for Christmas. Her family was very wealthy, and she was talking about all the things she got for Christmas. I shouldn't laugh, but this is when I was in my late teens. And my mother gave me one glove for Christmas. She couldn't find the other one. They were secondhand. No glove, no love. So it was hard for her to understand what it's like growing up poor or being poor. So we have a kind of comfort that has come out of the cold justice of our ancestors, and now we think that we don't need any of that anymore. And assuming that your parents are not mentally incompetent, in which case, obviously, that's a matter for the laws and having them declared incompetent and all that kind of stuff. Assuming your parents are not mentally incompetent, but they're just kind of, I don't need any help, and they're just kind of vain and aiming for a sort of rampant and perhaps pathological level of, quote, self-sufficiency, let them. Let them. Let them. My mother didn't want to take any feedback or allow me to have any room for scope or negotiations in our relationship. So if people don't take any feedback, let them fail. If people, let me say this again, if people don't take any feedback, let them fail. Now, again, assuming no mental incompetence and so on the part of your parents. So if you have a friend who has a business idea that he's very enthusiastic about, but which seems kind of incoherent to you, then try to give him some feedback. I had a friend, oh gosh, this is many years ago. I had a friend many years ago who wrote a book and was involved in contract negotiations. Now, I have quite a lot of experience in contract negotiations because I helped to negotiate multi-million-dollar software contracts back when I was a software entrepreneur. And so I said, oh, you know, I'd be happy to help, or I can give you some tips or something like that. Did he listen? No. He decided to do it all himself, and he got absolutely taken to the cleaners. Offer people help. I'm a nice guy. I actually really like to help people as a whole. I mean, that's sort of my whole thing online is to help people. So offer to help people. And if they take your help, wonderful. If they want to do it all themselves, let them do it all themselves. Even if you know it's going to go badly, let people learn, right? So this is a male-female distinction. So men let people learn by failure if they won't take help. Women want to prevent people from learning by failure. And of course, it takes just a moment to understand why. Women deal with babies and toddlers. You can't let babies and toddlers learn by failure, right? You can't say to the little toddler, oh yeah, well, you'll learn. You stick the fork in the electrical socket, you'll learn, because it kill the kid, right? Or seriously damage the kid. So women are about preventing problems no matter what. And men are like, once your kid is learning how to ride a bike, you can say you should take it slow and so on. Your kids will try to ride without hands on the handlebars. You can say, I did it when I was younger, so who am I to say, right? Wear a helmet and all of that, knee pads, elbow pads if they're just learning and it's, concrete or something dangerous. But, your kids are going to fall. Your kids are going to fall. So if you're offering help to your parents and they are mentally competent and they don't want the help, let them fail. Say, but the consequences of them failing could be so catastrophic. It's like, but you can't be other people's immune systems, right? You can, if you've got a sickly friend, you can't say, hey man, don't worry, I'm going to exercise and eat right so that I can be your immune system. Like this blending of consciousnesses is kind of creepy and kind of pathological and no identity based. If your parents want to do things on their own and they won't take any advice and they won't take any feedback, let them. You can't be somebody else's conscience. You can't be somebody else's common sense. You can't be somebody else's keep your head on a swivel, survival instinct, early warning signal, situational awareness consciousness. You can't do it. You can't digest food for other people. You can't poop for other people, and you can't be other people's common sense. I love to help people, and if people don't listen and they don't want my help, I move on. And I really do my best to be disciplined, to not give it another moment's thought. And then when you know somebody is making a mistake and you know it's going to go badly and they won't take any advice or feedback, or they take advice and feedback but don't really do it, like you should do this, and like, yeah, I should do this, and then they don't do it, then let them fail. People who won't learn by reason will have to learn through bitter consequences. We can see the whole West going through this process at the moment. People in the West, and largely the boomers, but have decided in their infinite wisdom to hang on to delusions in the face of reason and evidence. Okay. So if somebody who's not very handsome thinks he can be a model, you can take the pictures, you can say, look, you kind of look different from this guy who's a real model. And hey, and if they then go and blow $10,000 on modeling courses, because, people would take money for you for just about anything, great. If somebody who's not a very good singer wants to go and be a singer, like, well, I don't think you should, or I don't think your voice sounds good, you're kind of pitchy, then if they want to still go do it, hey man, go do it. I mean, don't be there to catch them, don't be there to fix things up. The price, for me, and I think this is rational, the price of rejecting good advice is having no sympathy for the consequences. I mean, we've all had, and maybe you've been this person, but we've all had that one friend who's dating the girl who's crazy. He's dating the girl who's crazy. Maybe she's hot or whatever, but he's dating the girl who's crazy. And crazy girls will often, put out early and do crazy stuff in the bedroom and so on. So maybe he just gets sex hypnotized or whatever. And you say, hey, I don't think this is healthy. I don't think this is right. I don't think this is good. I don't blah, 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 right? And the price for me, and again, I think this is reasonable, the price of rejecting good advice is no sympathy for the consequences. I don't think you should do that. Here's why, here's why, here's why. And you go and do that and it crashes out. Okay. I mean, I'm not going to help. I'm not going to fix it. I'm not even going to really listen. You shouldn't date this girl. She's crazy. Hey man, she's stalking me. It's like, and like, I don't get involved in the problems caused by people not taking my advice. I mean, I'm pretty good at giving advice. It's kind of my whole gig, right? In a lot of ways. And yeah, if people don't listen to advice, you should quit smoking. You should quit smoking. You should quit. No, I'm good. Okay, well, then if you get sick from smoking, I'm not going to visit you in the hospital. Okay. The great thing about giving good advice is either people take it, in which case hopefully their lives get better, or if people don't take it, you're free of obligation. Free of obligation. You should really lose weight. Hey, man, you're kind of gaining weight. No, I'm fine. I'm just big bone to bone. It's like, and then they get knee problems or hip problems or back problems or the shortness of breath, and they're like complaining about it. It's like, and this is true for me. I have spent decades, and I've spent over 40 years giving the world good advice, over 20 of them in the public arena. And the great news is that if you give the world advice and the world doesn't listen, you don't have to care about where the world goes. I'm not going to give good advice and then get wrapped and bound up in the negative consequences from people who don't take my advice. Giving advice is a solemn responsibility. You should be very careful and try and give the very best advice you can with as much hedging as possible and as much reason and evidence as possible. But once you give advice that is good, if people fail to listen to it or refuse to listen to it, then consequences have to punish vanity. Vanity is a form of hedonism. Vanity is, I want what I want. I won't restrain my desires, my ego, my status for the sake of reason and evidence. And, when I was in theater school, I was one of the principals in the play King Lear, which is an amazing and powerful play, where an arrogant king is brought down by his own arrogance to the point where he finally says, I'm a very fond, foolish old man. And there's a gentleness with Cordelia and a tenderness that is very powerful. To break vanity is the essence of maturity. Vanity is a hangover from teenage years. Teenagers is the famous quote from Mark Twain. I left home at 16 because my dad didn't know anything. When I returned a couple of years later, I was amazed at how much he'd learned in the interim, right? So I know better. I'm right. I'm perfect. I can't be wrong. This is all just vanity, and it's fine, whatever. It's a natural part of kind of growing up. But you got to break it. You've got to have that moment where you say, maybe I'm not right. Maybe there's things I can learn. Maybe other people have a better perspective. And if you do that, and for me, this has started around the age of 15 when I really began to study philosophy and realized I was wrong about religion. I was wrong about economics. I was wrong about reality. I was just wrong. And I have spent, it'll be 45 years this September. I spent 45 years taming the ego and turning it and bending it and sometimes wrestling with it to get to the truth. Because you have to have a strong ego to pursue the truth, and then you have to subsume your ego to submit to the truth. So it's a bit of a challenging, but exciting. It's like trying to ride a horse in two directions at the same time. So give good advice to your parents. And because you love your parents, you care about your parents, I hope. And so give good advice to your parents. And if they don't listen, hey, I've given people a little bit of advice in my personal life about finances, and if they haven't listened, if they didn't listen, and they're complaining that they don't have any money, well, the good news is, if people don't take your good advice, you don't have to care, and you shouldn't. You shouldn't. Because we're all engaged in a process of educating mankind as a whole, and if you go around rescuing people who don't take good advice, you're just making good advice worthless. All right. Somebody writes, when people call in and offer sympathy for your childhood, and then they proceed to demonstrate that they haven't listened to you, and then they ask you to change your mind on key topics, how do you feel about the original sympathy that was offered? I don't quite understand that question. Normally, when people are calling in, they're calling in for help in their life. They're usually not offering sympathy for mine, so I'm afraid I don't quite follow that one. All right. I respect and appreciate your posting. You've commented a lot on declining birth and incentives. I agree. Do you think this is consciously designed by elites or just a side effect of some other elite motive or something else? For what it's worth, I'm 47 with 3 adult kids. Well, congratulations. I envy you. I think that's great. Yeah, it is conscious. I mean, there's consciously designed. You can go back to sort of even the 1920s, 1930s, and you could look at the antinatalist propaganda. So yeah, and in particular, it's accelerated after the Second World War. So after the Second World War, the elites couldn't kill us off with wars very easily because of nuclear weapons and biochemical weapons, perhaps, and biological weapons, and so because the elites couldn't kill us off with wars, because the elites as a whole fairly demonic, right? They offer you things for free that then cost you everything, right? And this is the Faustian bargain. The devil appears in a puff of smoke and says, I'll give you your heart's desire, fame, women, fortune, talent, whatever it is you want. And then you get that and you have a short amount of great fun, and then things hollow out, and then things get worse and worse, and then you begin to be terrified in the last decades of your life about going to hell forever. All the pleasures in the past, all the pain is in the future, and it hasn't been worth it. That's the whole thing, right? So what happens is the elites offer you things for free, right? So they'll print money, they'll borrow money, they'll tax the wealthy. I mean, the wealthy pay the vast majority of taxes as a whole. And so they give you stuff for free. Free education, free healthcare, free welfare, free roads, free just subsidized buses or free buses in some places. And so they'll just give you a bunch of stuff for free. Retirement, where there's no money in the retirement, they'll just tax the young. So they'll offer you a whole bunch of stuff for free. And then when they start running out of money, they've got to kill you off. I mean, this happens when governments run out of money, they'll often start a war or some sort of massive conflict or something like that so that they can get people to accept austerity. And when you're afraid, you generally can't rebel. So they'll provoke fear all the time so that you can't rebel, because rebellion is anger and fear is compliance, which is why the young are constantly taught about, the terrors of global warming and all this, everything but the real dangers. So when you want to reduce the population, but you can't start a war. This is true of the verbal classes. If you want to reduce the population, but you can't start a war, all you do is bribe, threaten, and convince the women to defer having children. It's not super complicated. If you start having kids in your early 20s, you're probably going to have 3 to 5 to 7. If you start having kids in your mid-30s, you'll be lucky to get one. So all you do is you say, have fun now and settle down later. Right? This is the Sheryl Sandberg leaning in thing, like go have a bunch of F-boys all over the place, and then when you want to settle down, choose a stable, reliable provider, blah, blah, blah. Alpha F, Spader, Bucks. That's the general thing. So you just say, and it's not just to women, but you say to men and you say to women, continue to live like a teenager until well into your 30s, and then, and a few people will scrape out a couple of kids, but most people, certainly half of women are single, but no prospects in their 30s these days. So you just tell people, have your fun, have your travel, and the iPhone was introduced, and you can see the birth rates. AT&T carried it first. You can see the birth rates of the AT&T customers go down. So it's very much the iPhone, and when you make this kind of swipe and picture technology, I mean, if easy and available to women, like if phones only ran DOS or Linux, women wouldn't be swiping. And then what you do is you present women with an infinity of choices, and they can't settle down. And they won't settle down because there's always some new guy on the horizon, some better guy who's coming along, some guy they want to explore, some guy who's going to betray them. And so with a constant amount of, I mean, if you had tons of money and new job offers coming in every day, it'd be pretty tough for you to commit to a job because the next one might be better, and so on. So yeah, you just tell people to wait. You present them with an infinity of choices. You get them to extend their adolescence and enjoy, travel and brunches and selfies and all this other sorts of nonsensical, time-wasting vanity garbage. And you tell people that pictures are real life. And you also tell people that marriage is drudgery. You can see these really disturbing videos on X of dead-eyed women in sex positions, doing this after marriage. And it's really creepy and horrible. Like, why would anybody want to be like that? And where's your passion for your partner and your love of sex? It's just really gross. And you've seen these videos where a woman is about to put on a wedding ring or an engagement ring, and she sees herself scrubbing with crying babies and so on. Like, women don't have to clean if they live on their own. So, yeah, you just say that you should, shake your butt at the gym, and you should go out for coffees, and you should travel, and you should work cool jobs, and, itty-bitty titties in a bob. And not settle down. That settling down is drab, that you'll be a slave to a man, that all babies do is cry, and you'll just be unhappy, and you'll be ugly, and you'll be fat, and your hair will be messy, and nobody will want you, and your husband will be away, and you'll be miserable. And so, you just make not having children the fun thing, and you make having children the unfun thing, and you give people no moral principles or responsibility, and then they just default into not having kids. It's a very civilized way of waging war. It really is. And what it does is it takes shallow, short-thinking hedonists out of the gene pool. I mean, I'm not saying that's the end of the world, but that's generally what happens. So, all right. Where did postmodernism come from? Postmodernism is about disarming you so you can be taken over. So postmodernism says that there's no such thing as truth, everything's subjective, everything's relative, and it overcomplicates things, right? So I had a debate with a guy who wrote to me and said, I read your book on ethics, and I want to disagree about this, that, and the other. And then when we started talking, he's like, well, I can't define me, I can't define you, that's your past self, and all of that. And it all sounds, I don't know, vaguely erudite and intelligent, but as I pointed out, saying that I wrote a book in the past is not exactly a philosophically brilliant move. Do you know, Steph, that the book you wrote 17 years ago was written in the past? That's my big, deep philosophical insight. It's like, no, it's not. And then at one point, I was talking about where property rights come from, and I was talking about building a cabin, and he said, but you came from your parents. And I'm like, so your other big philosophical insight is that human beings give birth to human beings? It's so sad. You can always tell when people have been debating people less verbally adept than themselves, because they think that pointing out obvious things that everybody understands is some big philosophical insight. Yes, the book I wrote in the past was written in the past. I got it. Yes, human beings come from human beings. So it's very sad. It's very sad. So, so postmodernism says there's no truth, there's no objective rationality, there's no objectivity. The evidence of the senses is faulty, and so on. And they do that just to disarm you, because how do we disarm those who, how do we fight back against those who want to take us over? Well, with reason and evidence. It's the only way we can do it peacefully. So they take away your guns so you can't do it forcefully, and then they take away your respect for reason and evidence, or everyone's respect for reason and evidence, so that they can just take you over and you can't really fight back. I mean, if an accountant wants to rip you off, he's going to teach you that numbers mean nothing, and that way he can steal from you. What is truth, Pontius Pilate? Truth is the accuracy of the relationship between things in the mind and things in the world, right? So if I say, these are my glasses and these are my glasses, that is a true statement. If I say this is a pomegranate and they are my glasses, not a pomegranate, it's a false statement. Statements in the mind that are talking about things in reality or logical consistencies are true. Truth is the relationship between things in the mind that reference universals, things in the world, or universal concepts. And if things in the mind accurately describe universal concepts and things in the world, they're true. And that's what truth is. What do you make of modern Catholic miracles? Things like Fatima, Guadalupe, Eucharistic miracles, Shroud of Turin, etc. I have done limited research into them, but wonder what your thoughts were, if you've looked into them at all, I ask. As an atheist, well, I mean, they're not true, right? They're not true, they're not real. And I've never quite well, I guess I kind of understand it. But if God intervenes in the world, then God can't say he doesn't intervene in the world because we have free will, right? So if Jesus did all the miracles that he is purported to have done, then people had direct evidence of divinity or magical powers, supernatural powers, all powerful. If Jesus knew everything and was able to, walk on water and bring back the dead and cure disease at a touch and so on, then God said, well, you have to believe in me because I'm going to give you this objective evidence, which is you literally are seeing miracles occurring. Okay. So if God says, well, you know that Jesus is divine because you saw him perform all these miracles, and that's the standard, then why doesn't he show miracles to everyone to show that God is divine? He already did it. He did it with Moses. He did it with Noah. He did it with Methuselah. He did it with Job. Literally came down and changed Job's entire life. So God is willing to prove himself, to show himself, to prove his divinity. So then why doesn't he? Right. People say, well, you need faith. It's like, no, you didn't need faith in the past because God literally came down and proved himself in a variety of formats, whether it was giving you visions that were completely true and predictive, whether it was handing you stone tablets with the Ten Commandments, whether it was giving you the instructions to build an ark. So it was saying that it's going to rain, and then it rained. And so God, in myth, in history, perfectly willing and happy and constantly interacting with human beings, talked to Adam and Eve directly. And so God is consistently throughout the Bible coming down and talking to people and giving them instructions and doing miracles and showing them the way and rescuing them from Egyptian slavery and leading them to the promised land. Like, God's constantly doing all of this stuff. And yet, when science came along, God mysteriously decided to ghost humanity. Like, you can't find anything. So if God is interfering, then he can't say, well, I can't interfere because you have free will, in which case God is responsible for not interfering and not following his own moral precepts. So the parable of the Good Samaritan is go help people who are wounded, even at great danger to yourself. And God is perfectly willing to intervene in the affairs of humanity, but he doesn't help people who are wounded, despite the fact that it costs him nothing. He's at no risk, and therefore God is not following his own moral commandments, and therefore God is not good. That's not a complicated syllogism. So the more that God creates miracles, the more that he's responsible for the evils of the world. If God is completely hands off, like in the deist, winds up the clock and then lets it tick, then there can't be any such thing as organized religion, because God isn't going to intervene or interfere or grant your wishes or, pray. You're going to pray and get things. Like, nothing like that's going to happen. So either God interferes in humanity, in which case he's responsible for the evils by his own morals, or God doesn't interfere at all, in which case the miracles are all lies, and there's no such thing as organized religion that can offer you anything as a benefit. So, all right. Riddle me this. How can I get enough money to raise a humble family and thrive, but without ever working? And I don't want to live in a socialist commie hellscape either. Why do I not have this abundance? Am I just destined to live in the barrel? Right. Without ever working? So this is incomplete childhood. This is an incomplete childhood. So, of course, when you were a little kid, you weren't supposed to work, and your parents were supposed to provide for you, and so on. If your parents were abusive or neglectful or something like that, then you weren't provided for emotionally. Maybe you weren't provided for physically, and therefore that's an incomplete emotional cycle. So most people who don't get what they want from their parents go through life unable to grow up, and then they look for other institutions to provide what their parents didn't provide. It could be the government, could be the church, could be some other institution. Like the guys who grew up without fathers are drawn to the pickup community because they didn't get male instruction, and so they're very vulnerable to be exploited by rock-abbed a-holes offering them some imaginary bang-a-thon by negging women. And so why don't you want to work? Work is good. Work is fun. Work is nice. Work is positive. Work is productive. Why don't you want to work? Work is self-respect, right? Because if you are not working for your survival, someone else has to do it, or you're going to die. And being reliant upon other people for your daily bread is a mark of immaturity and a lack of self-respect, a mark of exploitation, and exploitation always comes from insecurity. And so why don't you want to work? And you can call me in, call.freedomain.com, but you want a bunch of stuff without working, which means something bad happened to you as a toddler, and emotionally you haven't moved beyond that. And I say that not with any negativity or condemnation, with sympathy, but that's the key. Why don't you want to work? I want stuff, but don't have to work for it. That's parents who didn't give you things. Next question. Please disentangle the concept of punishment. So there are two kinds of punishment in the world, active and passive. Passive punishment is, earlier I was talking about how if your friend doesn't take any good advice and disastrous things start happening, at some point you may choose to disconnect from the friendship. It's that there's consequences, right? If you go to a job and they don't pay you. I remember being at a company many years ago that was in financial trouble, and I had dropped about $2,000. It's a lot of money. I dropped about $2,000 on expenses for the company, and it was month after month after month. They weren't giving me my expenses back, and I was very concerned that I wasn't going to get the money back. So I ended up just buying a bunch of stuff on the company credit card that I still had. And I told them all of that, and it was fine. But I'm like, nope, you're not. Right? So that's sort of consequences. If you're not going to give me the money that you owe me, I'll just take it. Right? I mean, totally fine. So punishment is, let's say that you are a kid and your parents aren't peaceful parents and you do something that they don't like, so they hit you. So that's obviously punishment. Now, another thing you can do is be angry at people. And it's funny because peaceful parenting, I had a conversation with a couple not too long ago about peaceful parenting, and they said, well, peaceful parenting means we can't get angry at our children. And I'm like, what? Where did that come from? I've never said in peaceful parenting. I mean, obviously don't scream and abuse them and call them names. That's abuse for sure. I wouldn't do that with anyone I care about. I don't think I would do that with anyone as a whole. But you can be angry at people you care about. Love and anger are not opposites. Love and indifference, you could say, are opposites. Love and rage, love and abuse. But you can be angry with people that you love. I mean, I have a pretty good relationship with myself. It's not to say I don't occasionally get upset with myself, right? So, I mean, I was traveling not too long ago, and I had a camera in my backpack, and I didn't pack it properly, and it fell out, and it broke. And I was annoyed with myself for not packing it properly. Doesn't mean I hate myself or anything. It's just, you can get annoyed with yourself, even angry with yourself, and that can be healthy, right? That can be, it tells you to change course or do something better or different, and that's fine. So, there's active punishment like spanking. There's passive punishment, which is to disassociate. I suppose, yeah, there's something in the middle, which is to be angry with someone. So if your child, after repeated warnings, hurts themselves by doing something foolish, it's perfectly acceptable to be angry, because the essence of relationships is honesty. And if you are honestly angry at your child, which can happen, I guess you've got to be self-critical, it can happen. If you are honestly angry with someone, you should say, I'm angry with you. Say, I'm angry with you. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. It doesn't mean that I'm right. I'm just telling you what I feel. Like, I feel very angry at you because I repeatedly told you not to do this thing. You told me it was fine. You did it. And now there's a big problem. And I'm angry with you for not taking my advice. And it bothers me. And you can talk about it. Of course, you don't say, you little piece of S, like whatever. You idiot. You're so clumsy. Effing there. Like, that's just horrible, right? But to be direct and openly honest, yeah, if your children are doing something, like let's say you have a kid that's hitting his brother, he said, I'm angry. It bothers me. I got to protect this kid, and you're hitting him. So you get angry. That's fine. You don't want to get abusive. You don't want to call people names or scream at them or threaten them. Just be angry. Be angry. I mean, I hope I've modeled some healthy anger in call-in shows when I feel manipulated or disrespected or all of that, when people keep interrupting me. I'm pretty firm with them. I say, do not interrupt me. I need to finish my thought. Do not interrupt me. I'm not yelling. I'm not calling them names. I'm just being firm and hopefully decisive and honest. So, yeah, there's active punishment like whack, whack, whack. There is punishment through avoidance, which is more consequences. And then there's, in a sense, negative consequences through being direct and expressing negative feelings towards the person. And we should always aim. The sweet spot is in the middle, because when we dissociate, there's no relationship. When we physically punish by attacking or screaming or yelling or calling names, then that's a bad relationship. A relationship wherein we're honest, right? If you say to your wife, I love you, and you're honest, that's a wonderful thing. If she does something foolish, or she does something against your good advice, or she does something for whatever reason, just makes you angry, right? If you say, I really don't think you can park in this spot, like it's too tight. So, no, I got it. And then let's say she dings another car. Okay, that's annoying. And you say, I'm mad. I'm mad that you didn't take my advice. And also you can say, I'm kind of mad at myself that I didn't get out and check and all of this kind of stuff. But I'm just mad that we're in this situation right now. And that's fine. That's honest. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with you. In fact, you should be honest with people both about the pluses and the minuses. That's the only way you stay close. All right. Not sure if that's philosophical, but I always wondered if you were given the choice of living forever by transcending your consciousness or your conscience into a computer, would that make it impossible to cross over to heaven? Well, there's no such thing as heaven, and there's no such thing as life after death. Life after death is having you wait in a waiting room for a doctor that will never show up. It just makes your illness get worse. What is man's biggest regret? What is man's biggest non-death related fear? What is a woman's? So a man's biggest fear is not reproducing, and a woman's biggest fear is reproducing with the wrong man. Women don't really have much of a fear of not reproducing because women can always get sex, but a man's biggest fear is to not reproduce, and there's a whole bunch of fears associated with that, like not winning in the resource competition, losing status, and so on. The man's biggest fear is not reproducing. A woman's biggest fear is reproducing with the wrong person. At least it was before the welfare state. Is mathematics invented or discovered? Is mathematics invented or discovered? So let's look at, just dropped my glasses. Let's look at E equals mc squared. Was that invented or discovered? Well, as I said before, the relationship between concepts in the mind and objective things in the world, or objective principles like reason, that is accuracy. So if there are two bananas and I say there are two bananas, have I invented that? No, because invented things have no relationship to the world as a whole. So if I invent some Dungeons and Dragons monster, or I draw my own Pokemon cards, to take a cue from last night's live stream, if I do that, I'm inventing something. If I find a pot of gold in my backyard, I have not invented that pot of gold, I have discovered it. So inventions are things creating things that didn't exist before, and discovery is coming across things that did exist before but you didn't know it. And mathematics are concepts invented to conceptualize sequences of like objects. Oh, look, there's 3 buses in a row. Like, they have to be buses, right? Sequences of like objects. And it's not invented because it has to actually reference the like objects. And it's not discovered because we didn't trip over the number 3 in the desert. So it is something that is created with accuracy in the external world to consistently identify similar discrete objects. Hope that makes sense. Does friendship necessitate knowledge or merely kindness? No, friendship is virtue, right? Friendship necessitates virtue. You cannot be friends without virtue. Because virtue is consistent positive behavior, consistent moral positive behavior, integrity. And therefore, if your friend is nice one day and mean the next day, you can't really be friends with him unless you're a masochist, in which case it's not really friendship, some sort of weird kink. So friendship necessitates a virtue, and virtue is not kindness. A virtue, in fact, can be unkindness at times. If Iran and Israel are so smart in average IQ, why can they not figure out a peaceful way to deal with their differences? If it is violent parenting techniques, how come they're so smart despite abuse? So, violent parenting techniques are not directly correlated with average IQ. And remember, Israel is sort of divided into Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazi Jews, and of course many others. And it's the Ashkenazi Jews that have the very highest verbal IQ in particular. So I would say that IQ in general in a population rises based upon successfully overcoming the kind of adversity that intelligence will help with, right? And so intelligence doesn't mean rationality. Intelligence, a lot of times, is necessary but not sufficient for rationality. But in the same way that you can't be dead and a basketball player, but not everyone who's alive is a basketball player. It's necessary but not sufficient. So if people believe things that are false, and the vanity in the human mind that has them continue to believe things that are false and not subject their will, their angry, dominant will, to reason and evidence, then they will come into conflict. And this is not true of just Iran and Israel, but everywhere. If people don't submit to reason, they will become violent, aggressive, destructive, abusive. We either reason together or we abuse each other. When a peaceful parent's children are put in public school because of forced public school laws, are they in a similar situation to children of divorce, where they cannot be told the truth about the bad parent, aka the school teachers? Yeah, that's very true. That is very true. It's a very, very good point. Yes, of course. Can you put your kids in government schools and say, oh, yeah, it's mostly Marxist propaganda, and the teachers are fools, and the work is either frightening you into submission or boring you into dissociation, and the schools are so bad that all they can do is drug boys who are bored by doing useless busy work for 7 hours a day. I mean, you can't tell the truth about teachers and government. My dad says, Miss, my dad says that you're only here to collect a pension and take the summers off, and you don't actually really care about kids because the head of your union said that. Yeah, good luck, right? Good luck. So, yeah, when you put your children in situations of corruption that they're forced to be in and forced to obey in, then you have to lie. And that really breaks the bond. It's not really worth it. It's not at all worth it. All right. Thank you for the questions. I'll get to the rest later. freedomain.com/donate to help out the show. Really, really would appreciate it. Shop.freedomain.com for your merch. peacefulparenting.com for the free or bought book. And freedomain.com/donate. Thank you so much, my friends. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Lots of love. We'll talk soon. Bye.